Silver Creek, Texas, 1885. Walter Hayes had lived alone for 5 years and had gotten very good at it. Not happily, competently. He had learned to cook the 3 things that kept a man alive without requiring much thought. He had learned to sleep without reaching for someone who was not there. He had learned to fill the hours with the kind of work that did not require another person. His wife, Eleanor, had died of typhoid fever in the summer of 1880. The disease had moved through Silver Creek, through the water supply, contaminated wells, the doctor explained afterward, a failure of the infrastructure that a growing Texas town had not yet addressed. Eleanor had been sick on a Monday. By Friday, she was gone. The doctor said it was nobody's fault. Walter had not found this comforting. He had retired his badge the following spring. 23 years as sheriff of Silver Creek County, long enough to know where every skeleton in the county was buried and who had put it there. He handed the badge to his deputy, Tom Harker, and walked home, and had been walking between his house and the general store and back ever since. 5 years. He was 63 years old, and he had stopped expecting the day to contain anything he had not already anticipated. Then, on a Monday morning in April, he woke to the smell of cinnamon coming through his kitchen window. He stood at the window in his undershirt and looked at the building next door, which had been empty for 2 years, and which he had stopped noticing the way you stop noticing empty things, and saw lamplight inside, and a woman moving behind the glass with the focused energy of someone who has somewhere to be and knows it. A sign was going up over the door. He could not read it from the window. He put on his coat. He went outside. Margaret's Bakery, the sign said, in neat, careful letters. Standing on the boardwalk below it, adjusting the last nail with a hammer she was using with complete confidence, was a woman with white hair and a flour-dusted apron, and the expression of someone arriving somewhere they have been planning to arrive for a long time. Walter stood on the boardwalk and looked at the sign and thought, well, that changes things. She had come from Abilene. Walter learned this from Pete at the general store, who had learned it from the man who sold her the building, who had apparently talked to her for 45 minutes and come away with the impression that Margaret Collins was a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and was not interested in being told otherwise. Her husband George had died 3 years ago, a riding accident, quick and final, the kind that left no time for anything except the after. She had run the household accounts for 20 years and had been baking since she was 8 years old, and had decided, after 3 years of figuring out what came next, that what came next was a bakery in Silver Creek, because Silver Creek had no bakery, and she had always wanted one, and George would have told her to go ahead. She was 57 years old. She had a son named Daniel who had come ahead of her 6 months ago to work at the lumber yard, and who had, according to Pete, been considerably less enthusiastic about the bakery plan than his mother. Walter filed all of this and went home. The next morning, the smell of cinnamon came through his window again at 6 o'clock. He stood at the window for a moment. Then, without particularly deciding to, he put on his coat and went next door. The bakery was not yet open, the sign said 7 o'clock, but the door was unlocked, and there was light inside, and the smell was considerably better up close. He knocked on the open door. Margaret Collins looked up from behind the counter with the expression of a woman who is in the middle of something and is going to finish it before she addresses an interruption. She finished it. She looked at him. "Walter Hayes," he said. "I live next door. I smelled the cinnamon." She looked at him for a moment with amber eyes that assessed things quickly and completely. "It's not 7 yet," she said. "I know." He held up a jar, the last of the honey from the Mercer farm, which he had been rationing since October, because once it was gone, it was gone. "I brought this." She looked at the honey. She looked at him. She picked up a cinnamon roll from the rack, put it on a plate, and set it on the counter. "Sit down, Mr. Hayes. Coffee will be ready in 5 minutes." He sat down. He ate the cinnamon roll. It was the best thing he had eaten in 5 years. He did not say this out loud because saying it out loud would have required explaining why, and he was not prepared for that on a Tuesday morning. He left the honey on the counter and went home. He was back at 7 o'clock the next morning. It became a routine without anyone deciding it would. 7 o'clock, Tuesday through Saturday. The same stool at the end of the counter, closest to the window. The same order. Black coffee, 1 cinnamon roll. Delivered without asking after the 3rd morning, because Margaret Collins paid attention to what people wanted and did not make them repeat themselves. They talked. Not about large things at first, about Silver Creek, which Walter knew in the way of someone who had spent 23 years of it professionally, and which Margaret was learning in the way of someone who had just arrived. She asked specific questions rather than general ones, which Walter appreciated. Not, what's the town like, but who do I need to know at the bank, and is the man at the lumber yard honest? He told her what he knew. He learned things about her in return. She had been baking since her grandmother taught her at 8 years old. She could tell by smell alone when bread was 30 seconds from done. She had strong opinions about cinnamon from a tin versus cinnamon from the whole stick, which she ground herself. And she explained these opinions with the precision of someone who has thought about this seriously and does not expect to be told she is overthinking it. Walter did not tell her she was overthinking it. One Thursday. You were the sheriff here. 23 years. Why did you stop? He looked at his coffee. My wife died, and I found I didn't have the patience for it anymore. She refilled his coffee without asking. My husband died 3 years ago. Riding accident. I know, Pete told me. A slight expression crossed her face that he could not entirely read. Pete talks a great deal. He does, Walter said. He told me you came from Abilene, that you knew what you were doing and were not interested in being told otherwise. She looked at the counter, then back at him. He's not wrong. Walter drank his coffee. No, he said. I can see that. The corner of her mouth moved in a way that arrived without announcement and changed her entire face. And Walter Hayes, who had not smiled before 8 in the morning in 5 years, found that he was smiling now. Daniel Collins found out his mother was having coffee with the former sheriff every morning on a Wednesday in May. He found out from the lumberyard foreman, who had mentioned it to someone, who had mentioned it to Daniel, who arrived at the bakery at 7:30 with his arms already crossed. Margaret was behind the counter. Walter was on his stool. The morning had been pleasant. Daniel looked at Walter. Walter looked at Daniel. Margaret looked at both of them with the expression of a woman who has been a mother for 32 years and recognizes the specific quality of a situation that is about to require management. Daniel, this is Walter Hayes. He lives next door. I know who he is, Daniel said. Mr. Hayes? Daniel, Walter said. Mama, can I speak with you? You're speaking with me now. She put a cinnamon roll on a plate and slid it across to Daniel. Sit down. Daniel sat. He did not touch the cinnamon roll. He looked at Walter. Walter looked at his coffee. The 3 of them occupied the bakery for approximately 10 minutes. Margaret talked about the morning's bread. Daniel asked questions about the bakery accounts that were clearly not about the bakery accounts. Walter drank his coffee and said nothing, which was what the situation required. When he stood to go, he put his money on the counter and nodded to Daniel. Good to meet you. He meant it. Daniel nodded once, all he was willing to give. Walking home, Walter thought, that boy is not protecting his mother from me. He's protecting her from losing someone again. He remembered being 32 and afraid, not of the same things, but afraid in the same way, with the same inability to name it correctly. He did not hold it against Daniel. He simply noted it and continued going to the bakery every morning, because rolls were ready at 7, and Margaret Collins was behind the counter, and those two facts together were worth considerably more than Daniel Collins's crossed arms. Silver Creek noticed. Walter Hayes on a stool at Margaret Collins's counter every weekday morning was noticed within the week and discussed within the fortnight. Martha at the dry goods store said he looked better than he had in years. Reverend Cole said it was good to see him getting out. Harlan Briggs said something at the bank that Walter did not hear directly, but that Pete reported, that it seemed a little late in the day for the old sheriff to be making social calls. Delivered in the tone of a man who considers himself a wit. Walter had known Harlan Briggs for 23 years. He did not like Harlan Briggs. This was the accumulated feeling of a man who had spent 2 decades watching someone operate at the edges of legality with enough intelligence to stay just inside the line. Briggs ran the Silver Creek Savings Bank, sat on the town council, had donated the clock in the church tower, and was respected by everyone who had not spent 23 years watching him. The mining claim dispute of 1879 resolved in Briggs's favor after the other man inexplicably dropped his case. The cattle operation that folded 2 years ago, Briggs acquired the property at a price that bore no relationship to what the land was worth. 2 unexplained deposits at the bank in amounts that did not correspond to any transaction Walter could trace. 23 years of watching. Never enough evidence. He thought about these things on the walk home from the bakery, and then he stopped thinking about them because he was retired, and it was not his job anymore. He thought about them again, briefly, in November, when a Wells Fargo agent came through Silver Creek asking quiet questions about a gold shipment route that would pass through the county the following summer. He filed this without deciding to file it. The habit of 23 years did not stop just because the badge was in a drawer. Before we go on, I want to ask you something different today. Most of you listening right now are somewhere in the middle of something. Maybe you're driving. Maybe you're cooking, or folding laundry, or sitting on a porch watching the evening come in. That's what Forever on the Frontier is for. If this story is keeping you company today, leave a like. It means more than you know. And tell me in the comments, what are you doing right now while you listen? I genuinely want to know. Now let's get back, because the Wells Fargo shipment is 3 weeks away, and Harlan Briggs has been making plans. The campaign against Walter was not cruel. Daniel Collins was not a cruel man. Walter had understood this from the first Wednesday morning. He was a frightened man, doing frightened things, which looked like obstruction from the outside, but was something more specific and more forgivable on the inside. He started appearing at the bakery 3 mornings a week. He would sit 2 stools from Walter and talk to his mother about lumberyard business and family matters, and his presence made Walter's presence into something that required justification rather than something that simply was. Walter did not justify himself. He drank his coffee and paid for his cinnamon roll and said good morning to Daniel and left when he would have left anyway. One morning in June, Margaret walked Walter to the door while Daniel was occupied with the bread order. He's not a bad man. I know. He lost his father 3 years ago. He's afraid of losing me, too. That's a reasonable fear, Walter said. What he's doing with it is less reasonable. She looked at him. He looked at her. I know, she said. I'm working on it. He put his hat on. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere. She looked at him for a moment, at the gray hair and the lines around the eyes, and the man who had been on the same stool every morning for 2 months, and had never once said anything that wasn't true. Walter, she said. Yes. Thank you for not pushing. He held her gaze. You've had enough people push, he said. He went home. He sat on his porch and thought about a woman with amber eyes who had said thank you for not pushing, with the specific gratitude of someone for whom not pushing was genuinely rare. He thought about Eleanor, who had pushed him, productively, always productively, toward the better version of what he was trying to be. He thought about how different the 2 women were, and how both of those things could be true at once. He went inside and made his dinner, and did not reach for someone who was not there, which was something he had learned to do. But tonight he was aware of learning it in a way he had stopped being aware of for a while. The Wells Fargo shipment came through Silver Creek on a Thursday in July. $3,000 in gold coin bound for the mining operation north of town. Not a secret, Wells Fargo shipments through county seats rarely were, but the kind of thing that moved quietly, with an escort, through town and out again. It did not move quietly. The escort was ambushed 2 miles north of town. The gold was taken. One Wells Fargo man was shot, not killed, but badly enough that he was brought back to Silver Creek unconscious. By Friday morning, Tom Harker had a suspect. Walter heard about it from Pete, who arrived at his porch with the expression of a man carrying news he finds significant and uncomfortable. They arrested Daniel Collins. Walter looked at him. He was seen near the North Road, Thursday afternoon. 2 witnesses. Who were the witnesses? Pete told him. Walter knew both names. One worked at Harlan Briggs's bank. The other owed Briggs money, significant money, the kind that created obligations. Walter sat on his porch after Pete left and did not move for a long time. He thought about the mining claim dispute of 1879, the cattle operation, the 2 unexplained deposits, the Wells Fargo agent asking quiet questions in November about a shipment route that Briggs, as the receiving bank, would have known in detail. He thought about 2 witnesses whose names he recognized. He thought about a 32-year-old man who did not like Walter and had made that clear, and who was currently in Tom Harker's jail. He went inside. He went to the back room. He opened the drawer. He looked at the revolver and the badge for a moment. Then he put on his coat. He was at his kitchen table at 10 o'clock that night when the knock came. He knew who it was before he opened the door. Margaret Collins was standing on his porch in her good coat, the one she wore to church, which meant she had come in a hurry and grabbed what was nearest. Her white hair was not entirely pinned. Her amber eyes had the specific quality of someone who has been crying and has stopped because there is something more urgent than crying. He stepped back from the door. "Come in. Mind the step." She sat at his kitchen table. He put the kettle on because the kettle was something to do while she found the words. She told him what she knew, what Tom Harker had told Pete, which was the official version. Daniel seen near the North Road. 2 witnesses. The gold unaccounted for. Tom was a decent man doing his job, and the evidence as presented was sufficient. She told him she knew Daniel hadn't done it. Not with certainty, with the knowledge of a mother who knows her son's particular kind of trouble and what it looked like, and this was not it. Walter poured the tea. He sat across from her. "I know the witnesses," he said. "Both of them have connections to Harlan Briggs. One works at his bank. One owes him more money than he can repay." She was very still. Daniel was in the wrong place. Briggs needed someone to be in the wrong place, and Daniel provided it. "Can you prove that?" "Not yet, but I know where to look." She looked at her hands on the table. "Walter, I know you're retired. I know Daniel has been—" She stopped. "He hasn't been kind to you." "No. And I'm asking you anyway." He looked at her across his kitchen table. He stood up. He went to the back room. He came back with 2 things: the revolver, cleaned and loaded, and the badge Tom Harker had offered to return 3 times, and which Walter had declined 3 times, and which he had kept in the drawer anyway. He set them both on the table. He looked at them for a moment. He thought about Eleanor, who had died of typhoid fever in the summer of 1880, and who had told him once, when he was considering whether to run for a 3rd term, that the law was not the only reason he did the work, that he did it because he could not help himself, because something in him was built for reading situations and finding what was wrong and setting it right. She had not meant criticism. "I'll start in the morning," he said. He started with the Wells Fargo man. Jesse Calder was conscious by Saturday morning. Not well, but conscious, and in the specific state of someone who has survived something serious and has not yet decided what to do with the surviving. Walter sat beside his bed at Doc Elam's office and asked the questions he had been asking for 23 years, the ones that went sideways at the right angles. Calder remembered one thing that had not made it into the official account. The men who took the gold had known the route. Not the general route, the specific stopping point. That information had been in the Wells Fargo Company manifest and in the communication between the company and the receiving bank. Harlan Briggs's bank. Walter went to the first witness, the man who owed Briggs money. He went as Walter Hayes, who had known this man for 20 years and sat on his porch and talked about nothing consequential for 30 minutes before asking, in the tone of a man asking about whether the debt to Briggs had been adjusted recently. The man's face answered before his mouth did. The second witness was harder. He worked at the bank and had more to lose. Walter went instead to the man's wife, who had grown up in Silver Creek and had known Eleanor Hayes, and who sat with Walter in her kitchen and listened to what he was not quite saying, and understood it, and told him where her husband had actually been on Thursday afternoon. It was not near the North Road. He spent Sunday looking for the gold itself, not because he expected to find it, but because a man who takes $3,000 in gold coin has to move it, and moving it leaves marks. He found the marks. Not the gold, the marks. The specific disturbance of the ground behind the Briggs property. Fresh-cut lumber in the equipment shed at the bank, the kind used for crating. A conversation between two of Briggs's men that Walter overheard from a position he had learned about in 1871. By Sunday evening, he had enough. Not to convict, that required a judge and a process, but enough to take to Tom Harker. He had sent a rider to Judge Whitfield in Presidio on Saturday morning, before he had talked to the witnesses, because 23 years of doing this work had taught him that preparation was not presumption. It was respect for the people who needed the outcome. Tom Harker was not a corrupt man. Walter had known this for 23 years, had chosen Tom specifically because he was not a corrupt man. Tom was decent and methodical, and had made the arrest of Daniel Collins in good faith on the evidence presented. When Walter laid the evidence on Tom's desk on Sunday evening, Tom listened without interrupting. He was quiet for a long time after. The witnesses. One was coerced by the debt, Walter said. The other was in Abilene on Thursday. His wife will testify to it. The gold. Moved from behind the Briggs property. The crating lumber is in the equipment shed at the bank. You'll need a warrant. Tom looked at the papers on his desk. Briggs is on the town council. He donated the church clock. I know. Tom looked at Walter with the expression of a man measuring what he is being asked to do and finding it large, but not impossible. I'll need a day. The judge. Judge Whitfield is in Presidio. He can be here Tuesday. I sent a rider Saturday morning. Tom looked at him. Before you talk to the witnesses. Before I talk to the witnesses, Walter said. Tom was quiet for a moment. Walter. Yes. You should have been sheriff for another 20 years. Walter looked at the badge on his coat, the one he had taken from the drawer. No, he said. I should have been home with Eleanor. He stood up. I'll be at the bakery Tuesday morning if you need me. He walked back down the main street of Silver Creek in the Sunday evening dark and thought about what it felt like to pick up something you had put down and find it still fit. Judge Whitfield arrived Tuesday. By Wednesday afternoon, with the warrant executed and the crating lumber found and the first witness recanting under the pressure of a federal judge's questions, Harlan Briggs was in the cell where Daniel Collins had been. Daniel stood on the boardwalk outside the jail in the Texas afternoon and looked at Silver Creek. Walter was at the bakery. He had gone back to his stool because it was Wednesday, and that was where he went on Wednesday, and his part was done. The door opened. Daniel Collins came in. He stood inside for a moment, looking at his mother, then at Walter on his stool, then at the counter where his own untouched cinnamon roll had sat on 3 mornings while he watched the man he had been trying to move away from his mother's mornings. He sat down, 2 stools from Walter. Then he moved 1 stool closer. "I know what you did," he said. "Tom Harker did the work. Tom Harker had the evidence you found." He looked at the counter. "I've been watching you come here every morning, waiting for the thing I thought you were after." He looked at Walter directly. "You weren't after anything." "I was having coffee," Walter said, "and a cinnamon roll." Daniel looked at his mother, who was doing something behind the counter that did not require the attention she was giving it. Then back at Walter. "She was happy before," he said, "with my father. And then she wasn't. For a long time she wasn't." His voice was steady. His hands on the counter were not entirely. "I didn't want to watch that happen again." "I know," Walter said. "That's why I didn't push." Daniel nodded once. He looked at the cinnamon roll Margaret had put in front of him. He ate it. It was quiet in the bakery for a few minutes, the comfortable kind. "Mr. Hayes," Daniel said. "Walter," Walter said. Daniel looked at him. Then he nodded, a different nod from the first Wednesday morning, the one that had been all he was willing to give. This one was something closer to the beginning of a different thing. "Walter," he said. Margaret refilled both their cups without comment. And the 3 of them sat in the bakery on a Wednesday afternoon in Silver Creek, Texas, and the morning that had started 5 years ago, when Walter had stopped being able to reach for someone who wasn't there, was beginning, very quietly, to become something else. Walter Hayes asked Margaret Collins to marry him on a Thursday morning in September. He did it at the end of his usual visit, standing at the door with his hat in his hands, the same way he had stood at her door the first morning, the morning with the honey jar. He asked simply. She said yes before he finished the sentence, which she told him afterward she had been ready to do since approximately the Thursday in June when he had sat at her counter while Daniel stared at him and had said nothing that was not true. They were married in October. In the Silver Creek Church, under Harlan Briggs's donated clock, which the town council was discussing whether to remove, a conversation Walter watched with the mild interest of a man who no longer had a vote in such things, but still had opinions. Daniel stood beside his mother at the ceremony, with the expression of a man who has arrived somewhere he did not expect to arrive, and has found it to be better than where he started. Margaret wore the blue dress she had bought in Abilene for an occasion that had never come. Walter wore his good coat. He stood at the altar and watched her walk toward him, and thought about a Monday morning in April when he had woken to the smell of cinnamon and had put on his coat and gone outside to read a sign. He thought about Eleanor, who had died of typhoid fever in 1880, and who had loved him for 22 years, and who would have told him, with the directness she always had, that standing still was not the same as being faithful to her memory. He thought about a badge in a drawer and a 32-year-old man who had moved 1 stool closer. She reached the altar. She took his hand. He held it the way you hold something you did not expect to have again and are not going to waste. And outside Silver Creek was being Silver Creek, and Harlan Briggs's clock was ticking toward an hour that belonged to someone else now, and everything was exactly and completely right. They did not move. Margaret kept the bakery, Walter kept the house next door. The arrangement was that they were together, which meant he was at the bakery in the mornings and she was at the house in the evenings, and neither of them needed to explain this to anyone because it was simply what worked. Daniel Collins came for coffee on Wednesday mornings. Not every Wednesday, most of them. He sat 1 stool from Walter, the distance that had settled naturally after the afternoon he moved closer. They talked about lumberyard business and Silver Creek news, and sometimes about nothing specific, the way men talk when they have established that they do not need a relationship for an audience. He was not Walter's son. He was something else. Something that did not have a precise word, but that involved two men who had been on opposite sides of a thing and had ended up, through circumstances neither had planned, on the same side. Silver Creek recovered from the Briggs affair with the practical speed of a town that has other business to attend to. Tom Harker built a case that took most of the year. The clock in the church tower continued to tick. The town council decided to keep it because it was a good clock, and the clock itself had done nothing wrong. Walter agreed with this. On an evening in the autumn of the following year, sitting on the porch of the house that was now both of theirs, Walter and Margaret watched Silver Creek settle into the Texas evening. The smell of the day's bread was still in the air. Daniel had come that morning and had stayed an hour and a half, longer than usual, and had talked about a woman at the general store who he had been noticing. Margaret had said nothing that was not encouraging. Walter had said nothing at all, which was the most useful thing available. "He's going to be all right," Margaret said. "Yes," Walter said. "Were you?" she said. He looked at her. "Am," he said. She looked at him with the amber eyes that assessed things quickly and completely. Then she looked at Silver Creek settling into the evening, at the bakery sign visible from the porch, at the house that had been silent for 5 years and was not silent anymore. "So am I," she said. He took her hand. She held it. The Texas evening held them both. And the heart, which does not know what age it is and has never been informed that certain chapters close and do not reopen, continued doing what it does. Walter Hayes had gotten very good at living alone. Not happily, competently. He learned to cook the 3 things that kept a man alive. He learned to sleep without reaching for someone who was not there. He learned to fill the hours with the kind of work that did not require another person. 5 years. Then, on a Monday morning in April, the smell of cinnamon came through his kitchen window. He put on his coat. He went outside. He read the sign. He brought the honey jar. He sat down. That is the whole story. A man who had stopped expecting the day to contain anything he had not already anticipated, and a woman who opened a bakery next door and made cinnamon rolls at 6 in the morning, and a jar of honey that was the last of what he had been rationing since October, because once it was gone, it was gone. He could have stayed inside. He had gotten very good at staying inside. But the honey jar was on the counter, and the coffee was ready in 5 minutes, and something in him, the part that had spent 23 years reading situations and deciding what they required, read this one and made the only correct assessment available. He sat down. He stayed. And the rest was cinnamon rolls and Wednesday mornings and a badge picked up from a drawer for a reason that had nothing to do with law and everything to do with love, and a man who moved 1 stool closer, and a Texas evening on a porch that was not